when attacking the city of Ai, the Israelites sent out a small force that was defeated. This had a demoralizing effect on the Israelites, for the account says that the hearts of the people of Israel began to melt and became as water, meaning that they sensed they had somehow incurred Jehovah's displeasure and were without his help. Joshua was very upset, evidently because Israel, the army of Jehovah, had fled in fear before their enemies, thus bringing reproach upon Jehovah's name. Joe 7. 5-9. Watergate. Seagate, gateway. Watermelon heb. Avat middle.teak. A large oblong or roundish fruit with a hard rind, many seeds, and a sweet pulp having high water content. It was one of the items of diet for which the mixed crowd and the Israelites expressed a longing while in the wilderness after leaving Egypt. New 11. 4. 5 watermelons Citrullus vulgaris have long been cultivated in Egypt and other parts of the Middle East. Wave offering. Sea offerings. War. The sixth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. In pronunciation this letter corresponds generally to the English W, as in wine. At times, however, in modern Hebrew it is given the sound of English V. In this work it is transliterated as W, UW, and O+. Apart from its use as a prefix, it is rarely used as an initial letter, usually being substituted for by the letter Yod. In the Hebrew, it appears at the beginning of each of the 8 verses of Psalm 119. 41-48. Wax. Biblical references to wax are apparently to beeswax, a dark yellow substance that bees use in forming walls of honeycomb cells where they deposit honey or larvae. Wax is produced by worker bees, which, after consuming large amounts of honey, manufacture wax in special glands in their abdomens. The wax is excreted through tiny pores and forms as small white flakes on the exterior of the abdomen. The flakes of wax are then transferred to the bee's mouth, where they are chewed prior to construction use. The bee has control over the production of wax and makes it only when a supply is needed. CB. The wax is easily separated from the honey by melting it in warm water. This causes the wax to rise to the surface, where it can be skimmed off. The melting of wax is used in poetic scriptural illustrations to express a distressed condition of the heart. PS 22. 14. The dissolution of mountains and of plains. PS 97. 5. Mic 1. 4. And the destruction of God's enemies. The psalmist exclaimed, "As wax melts because of the fire, let the wicked ones perish from before God." PS 68. 1, 2. Way, the. This expression can be applied to a road, street, track, or path. A mode of action or conduct. Or a normal course, manner, or method. In the scriptures it is often used with reference to a course of conduct and action that is either approved or disapproved by Jehovah God. JG 2. 22. 2 Chi 21. 22. PS 27. 11. 32. 8. 86. 11. Is 30. 21. J 7. 23. 10. 23. 21. 8. With the coming of Jesus Christ, an individual's enjoying a proper relationship with God and approaching Him acceptably in prayer depended on acceptance of Jesus Christ. As the Son of God stated, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Job 14. 6. Heb 10. 19-22. Those who became followers of Jesus Christ were spoken of as belonging to the way, that is, they adhered to a way or manner of life that centered around faith in Jesus Christ, following His example. Act 9. 2. 19. 9, 23. 22. 4. 24. 22. Weaning. The process of training a nursing child to take food in another way. In ancient times, O textoi acute muritra longo, Weeds 1175 cates that Isaac was about 5 years old when weaned. See Isaac. A weaned child, though no longer yearning for nourishment from its mother, still finds security and satisfaction in her arms. Comparably, David had soothed and quieted his soul like a weanling upon his mother, and his soul was like a weanling upon him. Apparently it was soothed, quieted, and satisfied because he did not desire prominence, had manifested humility, avoided haughtiness, and refrained from walking in things too great for him. He urged Israel to act similarly, humbly waiting for Jehovah to time indefinite. PS 131. 1-3. Weapons. See arms, armor. Weaving. The process of interlacing sets of threads lengthwise and crosswise to make cloth. The group of threads running the length of the fabric is the warp, and the set running across it is the woof, or weft. Woof thread is woven alternately over and under the warp threads. 13. 59 Weaving was often done by women, but was also apparently an occupation of man. 2 Chi 23. 7. 1 Ch 4. 21 The loom that the Hebrews, Egyptians, and others used for weaving was basically a frame. JG 16. 13, 14. Issa 19. 1, 9, 10. Ancient looms were either vertical or horizontal. One type of vertical loom consisted of two upright stakes with a crossbeam at the top. The warp threads hung from it and had weights attached to keep them straight. In some looms a lower beam took the place of weights, and in others this beam could be rotated to serve as a roller for the woven cloth. A common horizontal loom consisted of two parallel beams kept in place some distance apart by four pegs driven into the ground at their extremities. Warp threads were stretched between these beams. The wooden shaft of Goliath's spear was possibly being compared to such a heavy beam when it was likened to the beam of loom workers. 1-17. 4, 7. On the loom the warp threads were usually separated into two sets, so that the woof thread would pass over one set when drawn across the warp in one direction and under that set when moved across it in the opposite way. For this, two sheds, or passages, were needed. In a simple horizontal loom a flat shed stick was placed across the warp under alternate warp threads, and by turning it on edge, one shed was made, through which the woof thread was passed in one direction. Alternate warp threads attached by loops of thread to a lease rod lying on top of the warp were next raised by lifting the lease rod vertically from the warp, making another shed through which the weft was drawn in the opposite direction across the warp. After each movement across the warp, the woof thread was pressed against the groin cloth with a peg. The weaver drew the weft across the warp with a shuttle, basically a rod carrying the thread. Since the skillful weaver moved the shuttle rapidly, Job could say, "My days themselves have become swifter than a weaver's shuttle." Job 7. 6. After the cloth had been woven to the desired length and rolled up, the loom worker cut it from the warp threads. Issa 38. 9, 12 Materials commonly used by weavers included animal hair x 36. 14. Mount 3. 4, Wool, and linen. Compare PR 31. 13. Fabrics of varying patterns could be made by using threads of different colors in the warp or the woof or in both. A woof thread of a particular color might be run only part way in the warp. GE 37. 23. 2-13. 18. PR 7. 16. The loom worker might weave in an irregular manner, running a set of woof threads over one warp thread and then under two across the warp, and then running the next set over two warp threads, under two, then over one for the width of the warp, as in weaving gabardine today. By variations in weaving methods, a pattern is developed in the fabric even when warp and woof threads are the same color. Aaron, for instance, was provided with a white robe of fine linen woven in checker work. X28. 39. Weeds. Generally, troublesome O textoi acute miritra longo. Week 1176 Israel compared the action of proud King Amaziah of Judah in wanting to fight him to a thorny weeds asking for a marriage alliance with a cedar of Lebanon. 2 Chi 14. 8, 9. 2 Ch 25. 18. The Hebrew designation sha'ith appears to denote a variety of weeds that grow on neglected or desolated land. Issa 5. 6. 7. 23-25. 27. For this term, rendered weeds, is used figuratively to represent people who by their unfaithfulness have become worthless and fit only for destruction. Issa 9. 18, 19. 10. 17-19. Compare Dar 4. 20-22. At Proverbs 24. 31, the plural form of the Hebrew term mos, which is commonly rendered nettle, appears to denote weeds of all kinds. See nettle. The weeds gr. Z of Jesus' illustration at Matthew 13. 24-30, 36-43 are generally considered to be beated darnel olim temulentum, which very much resembles wheat until maturity, when it can be readily distinguished from wheat by its smaller black seeds. This, together with the fact that the roots of these weeds become entwined with the wheat, would make it most inadvisable to pull up the weeds at an early stage. If darnel seeds become mixed with wheat kernels after the harvest, this can have a serious effect upon the eater. Dizziness and even fatal poisoning have been attributed to eating bread containing too much darnel flour. The poisonous properties of darnel seeds are generally believed to stem from a fungus growing within them. Week. The Hebrew word for week shah-vua literally refers to a sevenfold unit or period. The Greek word sab-ba-ton, in turn, is derived from the Hebrew word for Sabbath shab-bath. The counting of days in cycles of 7 goes far back into man's history. The precedent for such time division was set by Jehovah God in dividing his creative work period into 6 days, or units of time, crowned by a 7th day of rest. Ge 2. 3 Following this, the next reference we find to a 7-day cycle is in the case of Noah at the time of the flood, but no 7th-day rest is mentioned. Ge 7. 4, 10. 8. 10. 12 7-day periods were observed with regard to marriages in Paddan Aram and in Philistia. Ge 29. 27, 28. Jg 14.